So welcome to another video here at Simply Spanish Wine, and today we're out and about and we're talking to an old friend and colleague, Jens Riis, who's actually a US citizen, but he's been living in Spain for several decades now. He's one of Spain's premier connoisseurs. He knows an awful lot about Spanish wine, and we're chatting to him about the way that the Spanish wine scene has changed over the last 20 or 30 years or so, and looking ahead to some of the challenges in the future. Jens, thanks very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So what we thought we'd start off with, if we could just ask you, you've been a long-term Madrid resident. You've been here, I think, since the 1970s. What first brought you to Spain?
Well, I was working in the computer-aided design trade, first generation CAD/CAM systems, and my company, which is an American company, took me to Europe and Paris and then England, and then they offered me a job in the same company here in Spain. It sounded interesting, and I came, and here I am. I left that company about 7 or 8 years later because I just wanted to do something else. I started poking around the web based on what I knew before, and I discovered that Spain was virtually non-existent as a wine producer on the web. Okay. And that somehow upset me. It was really kind of funny, but I just said, this can't be. And I spoke with a guy who had a website out on the West Coast in the US, Seattle, I think it was. And I said, why isn't Spain represented? Hungary was there, and everybody was, there was nothing, zero from Spain. And he said, well, why don't you do something about it? And it changed my whole life, that one comment, very interesting. So I said, well, why not? I had free time, I was making good money as a consultant, so why not delve into that? So I delved into it, made a website about Spanish wine. Then I had to get myself knowledgeable about wine. So I went to wine shows, I met people, I went to tastings and kind of bought some books and got myself up to speed as far as wine was concerned. And then I did a couple of websites for wineries. Now, I did the first website for a winery in Spain, from the La Rioja Alta. Okay. I did way back in 1994, 95. Anyway, that got me started. Through that, I got connections with the wine trade here in Spain, with the press. Started working with elmondovino.com, which was quite a big deal. On the day we worked 20 years publishing stuff about wine in Spain, tastings and so on. And in parallel with that, I got hooked up with an importer in the US who was looking for somebody to take care of his interests here and build a portfolio, because he had nothing from Spain at that point in time. So we worked together starting 21 years ago to find stuff that was interesting for his market. And we started with zero. We now have, 28, 29 wineries and 60 or 70 references, and ship a lot of wine to the U.S. every year. So it's worked out very well.
And when you started with the importer into the U.S., right, what sort of kinds of wine were you looking for?
So we started with some garnachas from Calatayud. We started from 2 or 3 Riojas. We got a Rías Baixas, a couple of Albarino wines from northwestern Spain. We found a Rueda, which was becoming popular in Spain, not what it is now. It's very popular in Spain now. Then it was almost an unknown, but it worked for the American market. We got some sparkling wine from the Cava country. And since then we branched out. We've got quite a few garnachas from different parts of Spain, which are one of the wines that seems to work quite well for the U.S. market. Right. The Riojas continue to work well. People like, and the U.S. like wines where there's a noticeable amount of oak in them.
So is that the influence of Robert Parker and
to a certain degree, yes. But Parker always liked balanced wines. I actually had the opportunity to taste with Robert Parker a couple of times, and I respect the guy greatly. And I think people misinterpret what he was looking for, because his wines that he rated very highly were potent wines with lots of everything, but they were balanced. Right. And what people started trying to respond to that supposed style of wine was wines which were totally out of balance. Overripe grapes, over extraction, too much alcohol, too much wood, and not integrated into a decent bottle of wine. I think the thing that I want to pursue personally over time is generate more information, knowledge, and stuff about other regions in Spain. I mean, there are some wonderful wines from Ribeiro. There are some wonderful wines from Alicante, from Jumilla.
Yes.
We have actually 2 Humillas on our list, and they're working quite well. But they're relatively unknown even in Spain. We've got some good sherries now, which we didn't have in the beginning. But there's still a world of wine out there in Spain and these regions which were, even to the Spaniards, as I said, almost unknown, and still are.
I was going to ask you that, because you, as you said, they're over 70 denominaciones de origen and lots of other different categories of wine region, and that's something that's really developed. So you started at a very interesting moment when, I guess, Priorat was taking off and the revolution was happening, and now you can get great wines from all over Spain.
No, I think that's probably, that's what really has changed dramatically in these 20, almost 30 years since I've been involved with this, is the overall quality of the wines is improved drastically, and due to better training. The winemakers are much better schooled. In the old days, it was a family business, and you learned from grandpa, and not that it did it badly, but technology came into play. Technology allowed for more control over the winemaking process. The tools are there now. You can measure the grapes in the field and get the potential alcohol levels. You can check the acidity. In the old days, it was you tasted a grape, and if you were good at it, you could get it, but it was not easy, and nowadays technology makes a big difference.
What is it that sets, for your customers in the US particularly, what is it that sets Spanish wine apart? What makes Spain different from a wine consumer's point of view?
I think Spain has probably 3 things that make it different, basically on the climate. In other words, we're getting, with the exception of the northern fringe areas, nice ripe grapes and nice easy drinking wines at good prices. The grapes ripen well in Spain's climate. Primarily limestone soils across most of the country. The altitude, Spain is the second most mountainous country in Europe after Switzerland. People don't realize that. And altitude is important, particularly in the warmer parts of the country, where you can keep acidity, which means the wines stay fresh, but the grapes ripen properly, and you've got a nice, juicy, rich tasting wine, which isn't flabby. It's got that nice little acidic punch, which makes it drinkable. Also, you've got some grape varieties that are pretty much unknown outside of Spain. In the beginning, it was an obstacle, but now I see it as becoming actually a plus.
I was going to ask you about that, because there seems to be a renewed focus on native varieties in Spain and in lots of other countries. So what kind of varieties would you recommend to people watching this, for example?
Of course, the key red variety is Tempranillo. It is the grape of Rioja, the primary grape of Rioja, the primary grape of Ribera del Duero, almost the only grape in Ribera del Duero. Rioja, there are others. It's also grown in La Mancha and other places, but it's in red grape terms. It's sort of the key. Next one down, which I happen to like a lot, are the Garnacha-based wines. Those are grown pretty much all over Spain, actually. Then on the white wine side, you've got the Verdejo grapes, which are pretty much unique to Spain. I think, and of course we've got other things coming down the pike, like Mencía from northwestern Spain, Godello, a white grape from Tamen, also from northwestern Spain. All of those are starting to get into on the radar. So the other thing in Spain, because of the climate, most wines are very environmental friendly. Even if they're not rated organic, most wines in Spain are produced in organic form, and organically. You know that from your own work. What does that mean? That means that trend toward biodynamic organic wines is becoming ever stronger. And Spain, many wineries actually grow, in fact, I would say most wineries, a large percentage anyway, grow organically grown grapes. But the certification process is a bit of a nightmare. And getting that certification process transferred to the USA officially, so you can put it on your label and say this is an organic wine, is a nightmare.
It's a bureaucratic nightmare.
It's a bureaucratic nightmare. And so many times the wines don't say organic, which is what people are looking for. But the bureaucracy in that case is kind of an impediment.
Which makes it all the more important, though, to tell the story of the winery and flag up the fact that these wineries are...
If you look at wineries that we work with, virtually all of them are 99% organic in every way, shape, or form. They use organic fertilizers. They've used very little chemical products in the fields. If they have an outbreak of some horrible disease like mildew, sometimes they're required to treat it with copper or something like that. But it's as you know, you've seen it. It's rare.
And this is also something that consumers, I guess, certainly in the UK or here, but I guess in the US as well, they're increasingly interested in the environmental impact, the carbon impact of what they're drinking. No?
All of that has become important. In fact, in the website that my client maintains, one of the things that we put on the wines, if the wines are organically grown, or the grapes are organically grown but the wines aren't certified, or if they're environmental friendly, sustainable winemaking is one of the things that's becoming important, even if you don't have the official labels, organic or biodynamic or whatever you want to call it. You're getting a certification from the winery that they're using sustainable methods to grow their grapes and minimal use of external stuff.
And even, I guess, in the logistics chain, people are starting to talk about things like the packaging and the weight of the glass of the bottle. Is that, do you think, going to change the way, for example, wine crosses the Atlantic to the US?
Well, I think a lot of wineries are already using pretty much minimal weight bottles. The ones who want to show off are still using big, heavy bottles. I think that's fading. I can see that. There's a new generation of bottles that look big and heavy, but actually don't weigh very much, which is what I think will become the trend over time. Glass is getting expensive because glass requires a lot of energy. And the more energy, more glass you have, the more energy you use to make the bottle in the first place. Then the more it weighs, the more it costs to transport it. So yeah, that's certainly a factor as well. Yep.
Can I come back to something you said before, talking about native varieties, lesser known varieties? Right. Do you think there are some interesting comparisons there? For example, when people come to you and say, "I like Pinot Noir. What would be a good equivalent?" Or "I like to drink Chablis from France. What would be a nice equivalent in Spain?"
Okay.
How do you answer that question?
I think if you want to relate those kinds of wines back to Spain, I think there are good Pinot Noirs here, but not very many, because the grape that hasn't done well in the Spanish climate. But there are many of the Garnachas, particularly from the Madrid area, from the Gredos area, which are very very Pinot-like, and people like those. I know I've talked to people who don't like them because they're not rough enough and rough and ready and rich enough. They're more delicate. Yes, right. Ethereal kind of wines, and those wines are wines that would be perfect for a Pinot drinker. The Verdejos from the better producers can be a nice alternative to Chablis. There are also some good Chardonnays coming out of Spain. You know, Chablis is Chardonnay, and there are some very interesting ones, particularly from Navarra, also from the Barcelona area, from Penedès. It's not widely planted, but there is quite a bit of Chardonnay in Spain as well. So there are alternatives on that side, and the same grape variety. People who like heftier wines, you've got the Monastrells from Alicante, from Jumilla, and those places, and those are meaty, muscular wines. Toro, it's Tempranillo, but it's a Tempranillo clone, which is much richer, thicker, darker, in line with what people are looking for. Like Cabernet drinkers would like Toro, I think, because it's that rich, dark approach to wine. Also, if you're liking Chablis, which can be quite acidic and bright, some of the Albariños up from northwestern Spain can be interesting for those particular taste buds.
I wanted to ask you about because that's a corner of Spain where you do find lots of weird and wonderful native grapes that people perhaps know less about. Things like Treixadura, or Torrontés, or Loureira, or the red varieties as well.
Well, the exception of the Albariño, the rest of them are relatively unknown. Godillo is starting to show well. Treixadura, the wines from Ribeiro. Ribeiro was in a region which produced a lot of bulk, horrible wines, watery, not very interesting. Now they're making some magnificent wines, both white and red. based on Trechadura, but they also have Albarino, Lado, a series of other grape varieties that are mixed in. You also have red grapes from things like Maranzao and Mancilla, and those grapes which some of them are related to French grapes, some of them are not. I love French wine, by the way. I shouldn't say
You're
that.
a big French fan.
I started with French wine. That was always and
Southern Rhone. You like? I seem to remember.
Now when I started early on, Bordeaux was my thing. Problem with Bordeaux is that, well, they get expensive, the good ones, and you have to wait a long time before you can drink them because fresh out of the winery, they're really not very useful. Southern Rhone I like Champagne, of course. Who doesn't?
And how do you set Cava alongside Champagne for all those Champagne drinkers out there who want to maintain quality but perhaps not spend quite so much? Is Cava a good alternative?
Well, I think I hesitate to compare the two. For a couple of reasons. One is that the climates are totally different. Champagne is way north, it's very cold, the grapes don't ripen, and so you're in a limestone, well, actually chalky soils, and so it's a different kind of environment and different grape variety, generally, although you do Chardonnay in some parts of Spain. The climate is quite different, as I said. You're almost at sea level in most of the Cava producing areas, whereas you're just south of Paris in almost northern France, and it's totally different. But yeah, there are some excellent Cavas out there now.
So if we've sort of looked back over the last 20 to 30 years, if we look ahead for the next 10 years, say, what's Spain got? What are the strong points that Spain has in its favour?
Well, I think the future, for me, looks quite good because I think Spain has that reliability thing. We don't get huge vintage to vintage variations in Spain because of the climate.
Sure.
Unlike places like Bordeaux and others where you can have a bad year and the wine's terrible. Yeah. Some of them will come up short because of things like frost, but the quality levels have been pretty reliable across the board, and that's primarily because it's a warm, dry climate, and moisture is the big enemy of the plant. If I had to say one thing about what make wine interesting for me anyway, it's called pleasure. Wine, if it doesn't give you pleasure, why bother drinking it? And I think Spanish wines, from my experience, offer that pleasure factor generally more than many other areas.
Jens Riis, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
It's been great chatting to you.
Okay,
again.
great.
Take care.
Thank you. Okay, bye.